Hello, I'm just continuing from yesterday with my fumbling around trying to set up a flying wing, fixed wing UAV with Mission Planner and Arduplane. And I got some good comments yesterday that pointed out a few very helpful things for me. And I also realized that if you put Arduplane in your Google search instead of Ardupilot or Mission Planner or something a little bit more generic, you get better results. So when I searched for Arduplane flight mode channel, I got this page here which says exactly what I needed to know. The flight mode channel is that. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you what it is by default, but it does at least tell you how to change it. So I'll go and try changing that in a minute. But I noticed in the URL here we have plane, and yesterday I'd been seeing copter, and I found that if you replace this with copter, you get the same thing here, but on the copter page it says, on copter this is always channel 5. And apparently you can't change it for copter, which is weird. Why it's not channel 5 on plane, that is also very weird. But the weirdest thing is I could have sworn this was not here yesterday when I was looking at this page. And then I realized, went back and looked at my video to see what URL I'd been using, and there's yet another page. What was it? Planner, I think it was. Another, so there's 3 sets of almost identical documentation, and oh, whoops, where did it go? Here it is. So it doesn't say anything about setting the channel there, or which channel it is. It just seems to me very strange that they would have 3 almost identical sets of documentation like this that somebody's got to maintain, and users, when they come to look at this, wouldn't it be a hell of a lot easier if it was all consolidated into one page? So on here we'd have comments about what it is for copter and what it is for plane, and it's all just in one place that you can go and find. And you're not going to have people messing up like I did by just putting a slightly different thing in their Google search and then going to that page and thinking that they are looking at the documentation when they're just looking at one version of the documentation, so to speak. Anyway, all that aside, come back to this page, and as somebody pointed out in the comments, this 8 here is the channel that you're using for the flight mode control. So it's not very clear what this is here, and I presume this 0 is the current PWM value, like the pulse value at the current time of that channel. This again is very strange. Why on earth is it channel 8? Why is channel 5 okay for copter, but plane has to be channel 8? Because right off the bat for me that's not going to work, because I don't have an 8 channel transmitter, so I need it to be the 5 or 6. It just seems to me that the natural choice would be channel 5 if you're going to make people put everything on one single channel. Anyway, so I haven't tried this yet, but it was FLT mode CH. Okay, no, maybe it's all params, full parameter list. What? Oh wow! Oh, that took a while. Okay, so this one we search over here, I think. FLT mode. There we go. Is this an input? Yes, it is. Alright, so channel 5, and I think we have to write params here, don't we? Yes. Alright, now let's go back to flight modes. Turn my radio on. Oh, here we go. Oh, look at that. Yep, it's working. Okay, so I can set up my flight modes. Perfect. Okay, next problem. With my default switch here, I'm getting channel flight modes 1, 4, and 6. But I can't set flight mode 6 because it's grayed out. Why is that? So many weird things about this. Okay, after a little more Google searching, I think I've figured this out. Apparently it's some kind of mandated safety feature. People are sort of asking the same question as usual. My understanding is that it was by design as a safety measure, the rationale being that every plane setup should have a manual control in case the GPS stops working or something like that, which is understandable, but this sort of seems to me a case of the developer knows best and he doesn't care what the users think, and the users are just stupid and he needs to take care of them, sort of thing like that. I would much rather have my manual on here, and I think, to be honest, I'm actually going to have to put it on here as well. So I'm going to have a manual here and a manual here. I'm only going to have 1 second flight mode. And the reason for this is that I just instinctively flick the switch up to this position when I panic. because I've been flying for like 2 years now, and every other setup I have, this is like my panic position. And if I'm flying my mini quad and I mess up and I'm about to hit the ground, even before I've touched the ground, usually my fingers already flick the switch up to stop the props and so on. So I really, really need to have my manual in this position if it's going to be useful for me. So again, it's just it seems like a great system, but it could be improved in user friendliness in a few places. See, here's somebody else asking as well. But when you get your users repeatedly asking things like this and saying what's going on, it should be a bit of a sign to you that maybe you could use a bit more flexibility in configuration instead of just saying that, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. Anyway, at least we know why now. So apparently you are able to change the function of flight mode 6 by using the full parameter list. As LucaMax says here, you can force flight mode 6 to be whatever you want in the full parameters list, but beware if you then change any other flight mode after that, Mission Planner will again set flight mode 6 to manual. I crashed because of this. So much for the intended safety feature. I think if you just treat your users like responsible adults instead of trying to pamper them like silly babies, you might be a bit better off in the long run. So I actually tried that, and I set flight mode 6 to return to launch, but for some reason it's not showing up in here, even though if I go to full parameters list and wait for a few seconds, I don't know why this takes so long to show up, and then the search function needs to be refiltered as well. But if we go down here, flight mode 6 is 11, which is return to launch, you can see there. So I have a feeling that it might actually function as return to launch in this state, even though it's not telling me that here. So perhaps this display is just hard-coded to say manual no matter what the actual flight mode 6 is, which is a little bit iffy, but I suspect it might work as I have it here. But as LucaMax warned us, if we then change another mode here, so I'll change flight mode 4 to fly-by-wire A and do complete, yeah. Now if I go back to my full parameter list, see it's 11 there now, but when it actually updates and we look at it, it's it has indeed gone back to 0. So this is a rather scary situation. So I thought I might just point that out. I just thought I might check which endpoints this thing is connecting to when it does the firmware check and download. So if I start this running here and I click here, you'll see it's getting the firmware list. And if we look at what happened there, which one of these was it again? Okay, so ardupilot.org is 208.68.38.241, which is in here somewhere, I think. So that's it there. So it's getting the firmware list, or at least it's contacting ardupilot.org. Yeah, must be getting a list. But whether it's actually making any use of that, I have my doubts, because if we just get rid of this, if we then capture again, and we do this, so it's doing downloading from internet there, and I'll just stop it at that point because we already have some packets, and look at the endpoints again. This time we'll see so radiolink.com.cn is 118.89.57.134, which is there. These other ones are pretty inconsequential. I think this is something in Google, and this is my local router and other computer. But anyway, you can see there, this is the Radiolink website now, that it is pulling the actual firmware binary from. If I had have let it run a bit longer, there's a lot more data. It pulls about, actually it doesn't pull that much. It doesn't seem like it's the entire binary that it pulls. But anyway, it says no need to upload, already on the board, because I did that yesterday. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it looks like they are getting this initial firmware list from Ardupilot, but they're not making any use of it. I would assume. Hopefully they're not showing you 3.8.4 and then when you actually click on it to install you get something else. Or maybe they are committed to keeping a watch on the Ardupilot binaries and immediately updating so that you never really have a chance to get a different version to what the current one is from Ardupilot. But anyway, it is a little bit strange and a little bit dodgy, as people have mentioned in the comments already. Okay, so I've just been outside to do a test flight, and as usual with these kind of things, you seem to spend all day fiddling around with parameters, and by the time you get out there it's too dark to do much of any flying. So I just kind of hurried through it without recording what I was doing at the time, and I'm just going to come back now and recap the few extra things that I needed to change. So I put everything into the plane, and then I did the accelerometer recalibration. I tried to do it first with this wizard, which I managed to do yesterday, but for some reason when I got to the 6th step, that is the 6th orientation of the airframe, the next button stopped working and this continue button didn't do anything either, so I couldn't get through it with that one. But I realized that there's one here where you can just do it separately. I wasn't sure if I needed to do both of these, so I did that one, and then I did this one, just in case the second one took precedence over the first one. I think this one's better to do. This is the 6-axis, well, min and max and 3 axes, technically, and it does basically what the wizard one does, and I managed to get it to complete here, and that works fine. And then I did the compass recalibration. You can see here I've got green values here, which I think means it's quite good, or good enough. I have no idea which compass is which, but I know there are two, so I just checked use this compass for both of them. Externally mounted, this checkbox lets you select a different orientation to the standard, but I just put the GPS module and the flight controller both with the arrow pointing forward, and everything was okay without doing any further settings. Like, I didn't get any complaints that the two compasses were mismatching or anything like that. And to do the actual calibration, I use this one here, which I read gives you a better calibration because it's done on board inside the flight controller. You don't get that nice 3D axes spinning around display that you do with this one, but that doesn't really matter. So these two bars here, progress bars mag 1 and mag 2, filled up fairly slowly, but seemed like everything was working okay. When it finished, there were no issues to report. Then I connected up my servos, and I found that, contrary to what I expected, the pins on here, we've got ground and then signal, and in the middle we've got no, you were going to say there was 5 volts here, weren't you? No, there's nothing here, nothing at all from what I can tell. So if you want 5 volts on here, you're going to have to supply that yourself. It seems like this Minipix flight controller that they're selling here is more oriented towards multi-rotors, because typically your multi-rotor, you're not going to really need a 5 volt on here, because each ESC will be getting power from the main battery within itself, so it doesn't really need a 5 volt here. For a fixed wing, you're either going to have to supply 5 volts from a separate regulator, or you're going to have to use an ESC that has a BEC inside it, which I did. So fortunately for me, it was nothing more than a matter of plugging in my ESC onto here, and that gave me the 5 volts on the middle rail to get me power to the servos. So that was fine. Then I discovered that the settings that I'd made yesterday, see if we can find those, to say what each servo does. Come on. I wonder why this takes a long time, doesn't it? Actually, let's look at this one. Servo 1. Okay. So I found that these settings had not been saved because I did not click write params at the top. I just sort of missed it. It would be nice if there was some consistency to these. I understand that it's not necessary to have a save button like this on every page, but it just sort of lulls you into a false sense of security if some pages have it and some pages don't. And this is a page that needs it, and also the position of this, I think, should be consistent too. In this page it's right at the top, on another page it's over here, and then you have other pages where it's like underneath the settings, so it's just sort of a bit messy, I guess. Anyway, so I set this to elevon left like I had before, and I also needed to fiddle around with one of the servos. I needed to reverse, so that's servo was servo 2 reversed, I guess, was the one I had to do it for, because this one is normal. And I also needed to reduce the travels quite a bit too, because the servos that I have go a full 180 degrees, and it was just too much, so I set them to be maximums of 1750 to a minimum of 1250, and everything was fine there. Then I had problems with an error that said bad GPS health, and that was on this screen here. And this sort of suggested to me that the connection between the GPS module and the flight controller was not being made, because health means that the GPS itself is not working. At least that's, to my mind, that's what I thought it meant. And I thought, oh no, when I plugged it in and put everything into the plane and crammed it in, because it was a pretty tight space, I must have damaged one of the wiring or something. But back to Google again. No, that just means that the signal is not very good. So that error message, maybe bad GPS signal, would be a little bit more accurate, I think, less misleading. So when that was fixed, and you can see you've got 3D GPS, it's all fine now. The plane is down the other end of the house in the living room where it has pretty good GPS signal. After that I had something called bad AHRS, and back to Google again, that was also solved by just making sure that the GPS had a good signal. So just put the plane outside and the AHRS message went away. So then I was one step away from arming the plane and getting it flying. Oh, by the way, yeah, I managed to confirm that even though, where is it, here? No, this one, flight modes, where is it? Flight modes. Yeah, so even though this channel 6 here is displaying manual on this one, because I've set it up in the full parameters list to be return to launch, when I flip my switch here, you can see this display. Takes a little moment to update, but I have acro in the middle position, and then fully down will give me return to launch. So it is working, and you can confirm it from here, but like I say, it's just a bit sort of awkward that it's not not showing you the actual value in this display. So the final little hiccup that I had to get over before I could fly was the fact that when I tried to arm, it said logging disabled, or not logging, or something like that, and that turns out to be just a matter of not having an SD card in the slot. So I forgot to mention this yesterday, but you can actually see it a tiny little bit here, but there's actually an SD card, micro SD card slot in there that you can put into, I think it has something to do with terrain data as well. It can download terrain data onto that, and also obviously for logging the flight as you fly to, like a black box sort of a feature. So I found that I could, rather than put an SD card in, which I don't actually have a spare one around, plus I'd buried the flight controller right down the bottom of my plane where it's kind of hard to get at. But I found that if you go to the full parameter list and I was just trying to disable the logging completely. So by typing logging in this search, I found, there may have been another way to do it, but I found that this arming check here, as it says, it's a bit mask that will specify which things to check for when you try and arm. And the default value is 1, which is everything there. And I've set it to 30, which is the sum of 2, 4, 8, and 16, I think. Yeah, that would be right. Which is just the basic, most important pieces. And that let me arm, and then I was able to fly. Okay, I think I have everything ready to go now. It's taken a while, as you can see. It's just after sunset. Beautiful sunset it was too, but unfortunately my hat cam is not going to show that to you very well, probably. Anyway, I'm just going to throw this and see what happens. So I have one switch manual, one switch acro, one switch return to launch, and we are armed, and elevons are all going the right way. So let's give it a try. Whoa, that was a bit rough. It was I think it's just the travels on the servo were extremely high. I'm barely moving the sticks at all. So, okay, manual mode works. Let's switch into acro. Works nicely. So you probably can't see this very well, but it's pitching backwards, I think. So it's supposed to be just using the gyro in this mode, I think. It's not doing a perfect job. It's keeping it pretty steady and roll, but the pitch seems to be constantly pitching backwards. So maybe the gyro didn't get calibrated properly, almost stalled there. Right, let's see what return to home does for us, eh? Holy crap. Oh boy, I should have done this with a bit more daylight. I only just saved that. Did you see what happened? It pitched almost vertically upward. I'm flying in manual mode now. It pitched almost vertically upward as if it was trying to reach the 80-meter altitude that I set it to. And then it just did a pure vertical nosedive towards the ground. I don't think I want to do that again. At least not in this light, because it's quite hard to rescue it when all you can see is the silhouette. So I'm pretty amazed that I actually managed to prevent that from crashing. Not exactly sure what the problem was. So probably only about 50 meters high, maybe 40 meters high, so it wanted to go twice as high as it already was, but it didn't try and do it gradually, it just tried to like almost vertically go straight up. I'm just flying manual mode again now. This is reasonably okay. Do I try another return to home? No, I better not, it's too dark. Oh, just quickly. See that? No, it tries to do a pure vertical climb. Not very clever at all. Yeah, and then it basically just stalls. That's unusable, I'm afraid, at the moment. And I cannot see the plane at all, so I'm going to land. Where is it? There it is. Okay, just landing in manual mode, of course. Oh, it's coming in fast. Wow, not the greatest of first flights, that's for sure.